Welcome to the Women's Bar Association of Illinois Cable Show. I'm Judge Patrice Ball Reed, a past president of Women's Bar, and my co-host is Judge Jessica O'Brien, who is currently the president of Women's Bar Association. Our theme for this year is Leave No Woman Behind, Empowering Through Leadership. And our guest in the second segment is Dean Perea of the DePaul University School of Law. She is the first Latina to hold that position, and we've been talking to her about her life and her experiences. And now we're going to talk some more about other issues with regard to diversity, inclusion, and her next steps. So, Judge O'Brien, you may continue.
You are one of the most fearless advocate for diversity based on everything that I've read about you and everything that you've done. You've spoken candidly about how women of color are treated differently than our women counterparts, the Caucasian women. Tell us, if you would like to, share with us why you're so passionate.
Well, I think I'm passionate about it in part because, as we were talking about in the first segment about my mom, and I really observed even from when I was young kind of how she was treated in the world, and then as I progressed through, I started to see how other women, particularly women of color, were treated, and then I started to kind of reflect on my own experiences. And so I just, and part of it was I could feel the barriers, even though they weren't insurmountable, but I could feel them. And when there's some people, I think Claude Steele is one who talks about it being like a headwind. And so I feel those headwinds, and I don't feel angry about them, but I feel like, okay, we need to at least talk about them and figure out how we can work around them and through them, and to get to the places where we can and should be, particularly as women leaders.
I know one of the things that you say, and which I think Judge Ball Reed and I can completely relate to, is that as a woman of color, and this is from reading the stuff about you, is that we have to work harder. You felt that you work harder, and I can completely relate to that. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I think I've always experienced that women need to work a little bit harder, but women of color even more so, because and now there's a name to it, the presumption of incompetence, they call it, right? So the sense of when you're a woman or a woman of color, because you kind of have the double whammy, so to speak, is that there's a lot of stereotypes, whether conscious or unconscious, about how you don't quite belong in that room. And so it's the sense of, okay, I really have to prove myself every day, every morning, and that's okay. Like I consider it like a badge of honor. I just want to be awesome all the time. But I'm cognizant that because of the sense of, well, a woman of color, she's in this place, does she really belong? And it's like, it's small things like, people give me advice all the time, even though I've been in a position for a long time, that I don't think they would do the same for a white male, right?
Or Caucasian woman.
Yeah. And I think part of that working harder is also feeling like, not only do I want to prove myself kind of individually and just make sure that I'm always perceived to be competent and good at what I do, but I feel like also, because there are still few of us as women leaders, that we still carry our sisters on our shoulders, that if we fail not just for ourselves, but we fail for the women who come behind us. And there's still, I think, very few of us, women of color in leadership positions. So we're still kind of, a little bit of an anomaly. They're not. I don't think they're used to still a lot of women of color around the table. And so that's why I think there's still kind of what can she do? How did she? And also how did she get there? I mean, I think still particularly
it must
for people
have been because of your color,
right? Or
right?
affirmative action or something of the like. And so I think it's really important. And I really don't try to do it in a kind of way that, that's really, self-conscious. It's just being myself, but always feeling like I always over-prepare. I never, I'm always kind of on my game. I'm always dressed to the hilt. I'm always I always have my presence, because I feel like I can't really let it down in a way. I can't afford to be mediocre, ever.
And I love that, and I love your comment about I don't mind it. I welcome. I'm not sure if you said that you welcome
something
it,
like that.
but
Yeah.
it's interesting because sometimes, don't you feel sometimes though that you want to just be treated equally? You want to be treated the same. You don't want any special treatment. You just want to be treated the same as a woman who is Caucasian, or a man for that matter. And I don't know if you go through this in your, as a dean, or even in your past leadership positions, that, sometimes it's just so hurtful. Like, why do you have to work harder than everybody else why should you have to do that? You've worked hard all your life.
Right.
Don't you feel that way sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if it's hurtful in some way, if it starts to harm the people that in my institution that I care about, if that whatever that attitude is she's not good, and therefore my staff or my students or my faculty are affected in some way, that's when it bothers me. But most of the time, it's kind of part of the terrain. Maybe privately sometimes, kind of I wish I didn't have to. Yeah. But most of the time, it's been so many years that it's kind of, I kind of have gotten used to it for the most part.
And really, you don't want to be used to it, right?
Yeah,
there was an article that I read about you where you had talked about, we have to stop it. And it starts really with, I think you had mentioned the corporations, the people that hire the lawyers. If they have to demand it. They have to demand that women of color work on their files, and that's the only way it's going to change. And people have to be mindful about it.
Right.
But even outside of the profession, though, I mean, even in our bar world, do you see that too? Do you feel like you have to work harder because you're a woman of color?
So I think
before she speaks, I'm going to let her think about it.
Okay.
We're going to take a break and we'll come back with your answer when we come back to the show.
Yeah.
Aren't you a sexy little thing, huh?
Well, I would take this one home right now if I could.
Yeah, something like this at home, just smaller. It's a fine piece of work.
Well, this could still take a beating and run smoothly.
Speaking today with Dean Perea with DePaul University School of Law. She is the first Latina dean there. And we've been talking about issues concerning diversity and inclusion. And one of the concepts that you brought up was the presumption and confidence. I had not heard that term before, but I have heard you speak about implicit bias. Are they, the same two sides of the same coin, or is it a derivation of the implicit bias concept?
Well, implicit bias, for those who might not be familiar, is the way that biases and stereotypes are really part of kind of the DNA of our brain. And that it's not about explicit bias, it's not being, explicitly racist, it's just that we just harbor some of this, it's really kind of in-group affinity rather than out-group hostility, but it makes you, think different about people as other and treat them as other. And so I think that what happens is because of some of those implicit biases or stereotypes or prejudices that we might have about people who we don't know or haven't had experiences with so much, is that we treat them differently. And part of that is that we do presume the incompetence, that stereotype is, oh, it's a woman or it's a woman of color in this position. I don't know if she's going to be very good. That's the thought. But then we end up maybe acting on that and maybe questioning a dean or a professor or a judge a little bit more rigorously, or giving them more advice, or not listening to them quite as much because we have those biases that are in our brain.
And since you've talked on that concept before, is the environment changing any because the discussion has started? Or have people just said, oh, that's just another thing and moving on? I don't know what the environment is saying now.
Yeah, it's hard to know because I don't go afterwards and see kind of what happens in those organizations after I'll do a training or something like that. But I do have. And I was just participating in the Southern Judicial Conference, just had a panel on implicit bias, and I was just very encouraged about kind of the self-awareness and self-reflection that the lawyers and judges in particular were having about what they are doing. And because part of changing, or what you do is to take those implicit biases that cause a reflex reaction, to stop the reflex reaction and to say, okay, wait, I think there's some bias going on here. How can I then be more conscious and do the right thing and be fair and think of this person as an equal? But so even that self-reflection, I'm seeing much more of that and more of that conversation, and less of a conversation that's defensive, like, oh, that's not me. And when you talk about it, it's like everybody has biases, and that's just kind of who we are. Let's try to not fix it, but to be able to in some way embrace who we are, but also to be able to change the way that we treat people and have that self-awareness of it.
I mean, Circuit Court too just offered recently, I think it was last week, we got an email from our chief judge talking about the seminar that's being offered to all Circuit Court judges on implicit bias, because it's really important, because most people are not really tuned in that they have those biases, and that there are those biases are affecting their rulings that are affecting people's lives.
Yeah, and the test that they do, which is called the IAT, which tests it's on, you can get it on the website, and kind of everybody should do it. IAT. It's
what does
called.
it stand for?
I'm not sure, but it measures the unconscious, not the conscious. So it's like you're clicking and you're associating certain images with certain words, and then it can tell you then whether you have more of an affinity towards black or towards white, or more women in the home or women at work. There's many different kinds of tests, and the truth of it is, for example, in the race test, 80% of all whites have an affinity towards whites, and even African American folks are spread across the continuum. So they say, okay, that's just the reality. So now, how are we going to be self-reflective and try to kind of break the habit? Right.
Well, but that's interesting though, that the concept about you attract the people like you, right?
That's exactly right.
What is that? Birds of the same feather flock together, but. Because you're more comfortable with the people who are like you.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So how do you change that so that you're more inclusive? And really, when we were talking about seeking diversity, right? You seek it. You want to be with diverse people. Right. But that's true that you feel more comfortable with people who are like you, or immigrants like you.
Right. Well, I think it depends on the context. But for example, as a manager, as somebody who's in an organization, I try to make sure that I have a diverse team, so they are listening to different voices all of the time, so that also some of this goes to kind of social situations, like who do you go out with after work, or who do you have closer eye contact with, or that sort of thing. And so part of that is a consciousness. And so what I try to do sometimes is to be very cognizant about that. And for example, put folks that are kind of counter stereotypical in roles that wouldn't ordinarily fit. So they was like, oh, that person's running this committee or whatever, and then get kind of folks used to the idea. And then also sometimes I'll call people on if there's, if I see an expression of implicit bias, and sometimes I admit my own implicit biases, right. try to model that. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different ways of dealing with it. And in the organization, if you're a manager, you can try to be a little bit more proactive right. about it.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that as a manager, you have the opportunity to do that. As a dean, you have the opportunity to do that. But obviously, you did really well when you were not in that position, not in a leadership position, because you were able to navigate your way through the different, your different experiences and different people you met. But for people, our viewers, if you have any tips for them of how you successfully navigated your way to the top. I mean, you were at the top of your game right now.
I'm going to let her think about that, and then her answer when we come back. We're going to take a break.
Thank you.
Are your children in the right car seat for their age and size? Is the seat supposed to be forward-facing or rear-facing? Did they move to a booster seat too soon? It may be too late to check when you're on the road. Fortunately, you're on the couch. Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Don't think you know. Know you know.
The last question that Judge O'Brien asked was concerning how Dean Perea navigates as a woman of color to allow for inclusion and diversity and not have people get defensive about it, so it makes it harder to accomplish the task. So we'll let you answer the question.
Well, I think partly it's about building relationships. I think people need to trust you as a person. I think it's really important not to be leading out like, oh, I'm a woman of color, deal with me like that. No, I'm a person who has a lot to offer. Let me do something for you. Let me be valuable to you, and then you will see. Like I have probably a more maybe an indirect kind of, let me be a role model. Let you be comfortable with someone who's like me being a leader. So part of what I do is I try to always like be there. I almost say no to nothing. I say yes to just about everything because, and partly it's because there's so few of us. Like okay, I'm sign me up, because once I'm at the table and they say, oh, all right. And then build relationships, then that helps quite a lot. And I think to be disarming, I think that part of it is I do kind of play in whatever the games or the, whatever the unwritten rules of the culture are, I play to them and, kind of get to know it a little bit. And then that way I think I can navigate my way kind of slowly but surely, and then try to get along the way like advocates and champions who will help me rise up and get the support that I need. But I think you have to still be very indirect about it. I think I think it's still very, threatening is probably a strong word. If you're kind of all out there, it's kind of being yourself, being really, really good, and being valuable to other people. And then they get used to somebody who looks and feels like you, and then it's like, oh, okay, and more of that. And I think as we diversify organizations, it's about having more and more of us at the table, being ourselves, and then kind of folks getting used to who we are and building from there.
So now, in your position, because you do have the power, as it were, you've got advocates and champions because they can spread out and spread your message. But in situations like that where you're in control, you have more ability to do that. But in situations like, for instance, bar associations, where you're not necessarily in charge,
right? How
do you navigate those kind of situations because you don't have any ability to control them, as it were? You're not in a position of power over them.
Right.
So how do you navigate it in those situations?
I think it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be, so different. I mean, I think that I would want to, be at the table and provide my perspective and help, kind of move myself up as best as I can. And maybe, if it's a bar association, for example, we're talking about implicit bias or something like that, maybe bring in a speaker, or maybe, talk about some of these things that might come up as they go along. I mean, I think if you don't have power, then you only have the power to be persuasive yourself in individual circumstances. And so you have to start very small. I mean, I think it's very incremental, but I think not just calling people on it, but just really trying to find different ways to educate or to bias the environment, kind of one person, one interaction at a time, and kind of being patient with that.
But I think you said it best, though, that basically, even especially in the bar organization, is that the more we diversify a bar organization, the more we can move forward the organization. I mean, that's a perfect explanation, is that we just, again, you have to seek it, right? In order for us to be more inclusive, I view bar organizations as a model for new lawyers, seasoned lawyers, to see, and if they see that the bar organization is diverse, that hopefully the membership as well, in their own respective employers, where they work, that they too will embrace it. Right.
I mean, and I think not being a novelty, which is, going back to like the 3rd and 4th grade, is like not being the only one at the table. There's still, I was at a bar association meeting with deans and bar association leadership, and I looked up and I was like, I'm still the only woman in the room. I'm still the only woman of color in the room. That's not right. I'm fine, but we've got to, by ones and twos, continue to diversify the bar associations, the educational environment, whatever it is, and kind of bring others along with whatever opportunities we have to do that. Even as bringing some students to things and creating kind of succession of leadership, because we're not as conscious of it. And part of it is because we're so busy kind of managing our own circumstances and our own experiences and maximizing those. It's really hard. I find it very hard to then be generous and bring other people along. But that's really what I think that's what it's really going to take.
But the other thing too is that people like you who are making it, who are on the top of their profession, that you are out here speaking to the viewers, demonstrating that all of you out there, women of color, that you can do it too. Not just the women of color, but also Caucasian women in general, right? We're still the minorities, and that you're out there, you can do that. You're the first Latina dean, you made it. So all the Latinas hopefully will think, I can be a dean too, or I can be whoever I want to be. She did it, I can do it. So that's why we're so grateful that you accepted our invitation to speak and be interviewed. Because I think it's important for our viewers and the public to see you, and that they can be whoever they want.
Yes, you're a great role model. But you also have a husband that you still have to see. So you're balancing several different levels in your life. So we do appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And that's important too, which we didn't talk about, the balance part of it.
Well, I wanted to ask you, though, I think we have a little bit more time, is what is your leadership philosophy that you want to leave our viewers with?
I think it's really important, wherever you are, is that you're building relationships and you try to be collaborative and really be inclusive. Again, modeling that not for diversity, but as a management style, that you care about other people's voices, that you care about excellence, that you bring people up, you try to fit them with their best talents and skills, and be authentic. I mean, I think that I learned over a long period of time, because part of me is very very decisive and very organized and all that. But part of me is also kind of a little bit goofy and fun and warm, and I think that's important too. So I try to really mix it up in my leadership style.
Well, certainly you are a perfect model for being collaborative, inclusive, and
happy with some fun. It's a good thing.
That's important.
Yes. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight, as this is the end of our show. And this is the second segment that we had with Dean Perea. We hope you enjoyed her inspiration and motivations and exciting information as we did. This has been the Women's Bar Association of Illinois Cable Show. Thank you so much for tuning in.